Most of the computers in my old primary school had mice, and mice back then worked differently to the ones you see today. Our mice had balls, not in the courageous sense, but an actual small weighty rubber ball that would roll around within the mouse. This in turn would spin optical movement sensors on the X and Y axis and feed the data back to the computer. It was imperative that you remove the ball periodically and give it a clean, along with the rollers and sensors inside the housing, otherwise it wouldn't track properly. This was a fatal flaw in our school because we'd all take the balls out and throw them relentlessly at each other, or use them as catapult ammunition. Invariably, many were lost. Things changed in high school because we'd also draw round dots in them and jam them in the eye sockets of the biology display skeletons, or when I finally got to university, the system administrators there had cunningly superglued all the hatches shut so the ball could not be removed. This also meant that they were permanently filthy and needed to be bashed on the desk to try to free up the sticky rollers. I found a glimmer of hope in 1992 though, whilst being shown around the computer room at Fermilab's particle accelerator facility by my older brother. I got to have a go on a large and fancy looking Unix workstation, the first I'd ever seen up to that point. The thing that really impressed me about this computer though was the mouse. Instead of the cumbersome dirty rollerball was some kind of red laser light, bouncing off a very cool looking metal reflective mousepad. I'd never seen anything like it before, and it worked beautifully. Decades later, of course all mice are now optical. But I recently decided to go on the hunt for a couple of those really old quirky optical mice from the 80s and early 90s to see if any were still around, and turns out there are. In fact, I managed to pick up a few. This is the MSC mouse, a true optical mouse from the early 1980s, and I'm pretty sure it's the same one I saw at Fermilab. It has two sensors, one for the X-axis and the other for the Y-axis. It must be used with a special mousepad, covered with thousands of tiny reflective squares. It will not work on any other type of surface. Earlier pads were solid. Later ones like this were flexible. So, could you use it on a modern PC? Well, firstly it requires a serial port to connect. I don't mean a USB socket but a traditional RS-232 serial interface. All computers had them back in the 80s and 90s, and even today some PCs still come with serial ports, which is impressive for a data connection that's now over 60 years old. For those that don't have one as standard, serial to USB adapters are cheap and plentiful. So I was pleased to see that serial mice are still supported in Windows 10. You literally just have to plug one in and start your computer for it to work. However, for this mouse we're out of luck because it is so old it communicates in a custom protocol that predates the standardized ones from the mid-1980s. However, all is not lost because MSC also released a version 2 of their mouse with a slightly more modern looking shell, but more importantly it uses a standard mouse protocol. So yes, it works just fine in Windows 10, obviously no scroll wheel, but other than that it's a joy to use. It does feel like it comes from a time before super high resolution screens were commonplace, as by default it takes multiple sweeps over the small pad to get it to traverse a whole 4K screen. Turning up the sensitivity in Windows makes it behave in a more familiar way. I'm not sure how old it is, I think late 1980s. MSC ceased to exist in 1990, so it must be older than that. It's a pretty cool little thing. If only we had them back at school. No doubt they were expensive, otherwise everyone would have had one. MSC mice were one of the more common optical mice back in the day, but there were certainly other makes. In fact, some were even cordless. Check out this very unusual specimen called the Q500. It has two optical sensors at opposite ends of the underside. One tracks horizontal movement, the other tracks vertical movement. It has to be used on a special mouse pad that has lines for each sensor, and the centre of the pad always has to run through the middle of the mouse. The pad must be used the right way up and the mouse must be held straight. This all sounds like a bit of a faff, but actually it's a really nice mouse to use and feels very natural and accurate. In fact, I've been using it recently to play my way through Quake 2 on an old Pentium 3. The mouse and the pad are sized so that so long as the mouse is on the pad, each sensor remains in the right area. As a serial mouse it works fine out of the box with modern operating systems like Windows 10 and Linux. I don't know how old it is, but the last two digits of the serial number read 93. Perhaps that is the year of manufacture and that seems quite believable. Well, thanks for tuning in today. If I get any more interesting mice, I will be sure to make a video about them. Make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss my future uploads. Thanks.